Welcome you to the last in our series of Tuesdays at 12, interactive webinar series that we kicked off early on in the COVID-19 emergency response in partnership with Jen McGrath from the Mental Health Commission and Deb Zanella from WACOS. Deb's not able to be here in person with us here, but she is dialing in. We've already heard from her. She wanted to know if we'd start or not. Sorry, we're a few minutes late. We've had a great time bringing this series to you. We've learned a lot through it. Hope you've appreciated it. And it actually is going to signal different ways of us continuing to interact with you and work with you, communicate with you. So you're going to see more of this into the future, but it is the last of this series in the emergency COVID response. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we're meeting today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, for me and for the people with me, but there's also going to be people dialing in from around our state. So to pay my respects to all elders from around our state, emerging leaders in particular, that we're continuing to work with in these pretty challenging times we're living with at the moment. It's timely for us today that this is the last in this series. We saw on the weekend the Premier's response to the decisions coming out of National Cabinet and what it means for Western Australia, the stepping out of the roadmap for us as a state, and really the signals that sends to all of us for how we need to be positioning ourselves to support the implementation of this next phase as we move from the initial emergency response into recovery. So it's particularly relevant today, the topics we're going to be covering for you today. Susan Hunt's joined us. Susan's going to step us through the government decisions that were made early on about investment and the investment that's going to be happening through the Lottery West processes that you'd all be broadly familiar with, but it's been very much wrapped around COVID-19 response. So Susan's going to work us through that. And also Paul Isaacson and Helen Nyes from Communities are going to step us through some really important work that was kicked off just a couple of weeks ago, starting to pull together the data and the analysis that's going to inform the critical decisions and actions we're going to be taking in this recovery phase. So early piece of work, exciting piece of work, and we've already had a lot of interest from across the sector in it. So they're the topics we're going to walk through today. And as we've done before, we're going to provide you with an opportunity to ask some questions at the end of the session to all of our speakers, and as well as give us some feedback afterwards on how you found this one, but also the series overall. And Helen Reid's in the room, and she's going to help us work our way through the questions. So thank you, and I would like to now at this point introduce someone that I know all of you probably have worked with in the very many hats she's worn around the public sector. Probably got more diverse experience and more relevant into this moment than just about any of the rest of us. And so can I introduce Susan Hunt, who's been heading up Lottery West now for a number of years and being responsible for some significant reforms she's been implementing, all of which are no doubt coming to fruition in this moment. So Susan, over to you.
Look, thank you, Michelle. I also want to acknowledge I'm with Lorna Pritchard, who's the General Manager of Grants and Community Development at Lottery West. So Kaya and Wanju, I'm speaking, as Michelle said, from Noongar country, and of course acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. Before colonisation, the actual spot where this office is was built on a string of lakes and swamps, and it was a really important meeting area and food area for Noongar people. So it remains a very important area, and we're very fortunate to be here. So today, in talking about Lottery West, excuse me, great start, I want to talk about 5 things. It's firstly Lottery West as a grant maker, what we do and our role, which some of you will of course be familiar with. Lottery West's response to COVID-19 and our contribution to the community during the time of COVID-19. The 3 grant programs that we're presently running to support the community over this period, the progress so far on the programs, and our possible future role in the recovery period. So as many of you will be aware, Lotterywest is the only state-run lottery in Australia where all the profit goes to support the community. Now the slide here shows our performance for last year, but since 1985 actually, we've returned more than $5.5 billion to WA community grants. So it's quite a significant proportion. Last year we had probably our best, well, it was our best year on record, with our sales of $985 million. That allowed us well, the slide actually gives you a bit of a summary. 736 million went in prizes and grants, and the total prizes were 455 million, so don't believe you can't win with lottery, you actually can. But the issue that I think you'll all be really keen to understand is where our grant money and our focus are in the past, and this was immediately last year. We did 682 grants, and some of those went to what we call our statutory grant recipients, which is legislated for. That's the Health Department, 144 million. Sports and Arts, through the Department of Local Government, Sports and Cultural Industry, received 18 million each, which is for a lot of their activity and delivery of community art, art funding for the major art facilities, also funding for sports. And then the area which many of you may, through your organisations, been involved with, what we call our direct budget, direct grants budget, which was last year 102 million, which was for community organisations, local government, and also the Perth Festival and Screen West, which also legislative come from this budget. Over the last couple of years, we've done a lot of work on actually understanding that we make best impact from our grants, and we have created a community impact framework, and we've been working within that framework. We hope to get back to that sometime soon, Lorna.
Yeah.
But of course, COVID-19 has hit, and I think it's important for you all to realise that that has made a big difference to us all, but also to Lotterywest. So following a board meeting in March this year, the Premier is our minister, and the Premier made an announcement which reflected our board decision that every dollar we make in profit would be towards a COVID relief fund for the West Australian community. Now, I suppose there are a couple of things I wanted to reflect on this. Lottery has to be sold. And so as well as running a lottery in a very, very, in a sector where we're actually closing shopping centres, we also have to make sure we generate money for the community. So the Premier was very keen that any money we had in the bank at the moment, which was 55 million, we had in reserves and unallocated grants at that stage in March, would be directed to COVID-19. And then up to 100 million of our future funding would be directed to the recovery period. So it's been a very concerted decision of our board and the Premier about this is the direction that we'd be going. I would point out that in that decision and the announcement that was made by the Premier on about the 26th of March, I think it was that our statutory grants, that is to health, sports, arts, and also to Festival and Screen West, they would remain because of the most important funding that comes from Lotterywest. So in looking at how we respond to the position and the direction that our board has given us, we've created a framework to respond to COVID-19 as Lotterywest. The problem statement is probably familiar. You've all got them in your responses as organisations, but the mission statement is perhaps more focused for you. We want to maximise the impact of our available grant funding to respond to individual and not-for-profit sector hardship as a result of the direct and indirect impacts of COVID-19 and support effective recovery from the crisis. So it's very broad, and what that might turn into is what we have been now focused on and what we've responded to. The impact descriptions, which are on the right-hand side of the slide there, shows that this reflects the diversity of what Lotterywest does. Our purpose as an organisation is around building a better Western Australia and increasing wellbeing in the community. So that is a broad sweep of activities. We do support individuals, arts and culture, the community sector, and also local government. And increasingly now through COVID-19, sport and recreation is something that has been deemed as an essential response that will make a big difference to community at the moment. The principles that we've used and really fundamental to how Lotterywest does its business and has been so for a very long time, we want to be really as flexible as possible in our grants and be led by customer needs and what we're hearing from the community. Be open to achieve community outcomes in alternate ways. So we're really keen to see different ways that we can deliver value for the community. To honour commitments by paying an incurred and committed costs. So we know that COVID surprised us all, that's a bit of an understatement, but there were lots of things in progress, particularly happening in our community that we wanted to be responsive to. And we really wanted to minimise impact and support community. So this has helped guide what we are focused on as an organisation. And you'll notice also in the impact descriptions, you'll see our focus will always be on the not-for-profit community sector eligible under the Lotterywest Act. I will focus though that there was some amendments to our legislation. Those of you in government know that changes to acts usually take 3 years. We did ours in 3 days. So we did have some amendments made to our legislation which went through about 3 weeks ago now, which allowed us to firstly keep the lottery going, and there were a couple of amendments to our Act to enable that to happen, but secondly also to get to a wider variety of organisations, particularly sporting groups, which under their constitutions did not have a benevolent or charitable purpose, which is a requirement under our Act. These provisions are only for the COVID-19 period, so we will be one day going back to normal. So our response plan, and this was a board decision endorsed by the Premier, where with the funds available to us immediately, we have developed 3 grant programs. And I have to acknowledge our colleagues at the Department of Local Government, Sports and Cultural Industries, who were able to contribute $4 million, particularly to sports and arts, out of they redirected resources so they could become our partner, so we could work with them on targeting their arts and sports in particular. One impact that the Premier was particularly concerned about, and many of you in the community sector will have experienced this, was the impact of cancelled events, and particularly in the fundraising space. So where an event may have even been a sporting event, but the proceeds of that were going to a community outcome, he was particularly concerned that that would really inhibit the ability of organisations to respond to our community in need. So that's a really important focus that we were asked to look at, and also for particularly smaller organisations to be resilient into the future. And so it was certainly a very strong point put to us by the Director General in Local Government, Sports and Cultural Industries, that with the incorporations legislation, there is a capacity in this terrible time where some organisations could literally disappear. So the importance of keeping those organisations going for community benefit into the future. So to go back to where those 3 programs have focused, the one that's up and running and has been going now for about 6 weeks, I think, is our role in crisis and emergency relief. Now, Lotterywest usually funds working closely with others in the Department of Communities WACOS and other organisations, does provide funding for emergency and crisis relief. The Department for Social Security also does provide funding in this area. And of course, the Department provides funding for emergency relief counselling, I understand as well. But Lottery West is in that space where we historically have done this. And usually it's around $4.5 million a year, perhaps around that amount. We were doing some reform work in that area, listening to what we were hearing from the community. But what we've done in this case is quadruple the size of that amount, anticipating what we believed we would face. And we were looking to increase that in the immediate term. So we've committed $20 million, 10 million this financial year and 10 million in the next financial year to help meet the increased demand in emergency crisis relief, which includes food relief. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that in a moment. I mentioned the event cancellation. There's $14 million in that program, which is now open. It actually closes tomorrow afternoon or evening. Our grants officers' lines have been working every weekend, taking calls from you and others to help you put in applications. That is up and running, and it is focused on $5 million to sports, $5 million to arts and culture, and $4 million to community groups around these event cancellation. Now, I would point out, should the demand in any of those areas not be meeting that amount of money, we can move money between it, and that's at board discretion, and our board would make those determinations to based on the need that emerges. And then the sector support for resilient organisations is a larger amount, 25 million from Lottery West, again for not-for-profits to maintain their viability during this time. And that is all really, it's a big need here. We know that it could be much bigger, but it's also been quite impacted by a whole lot of other grants programs that are out in the community. We're not pretending that we're the only funder in this area, but we did respond. We did develop this quite quickly, and now you will see on the internet, on our website, all the guidelines and everything is there for you to have a look at. But I would point out in that sphere, this is a different way of working for Lottery West. These two grant programs are competitive grant rounds. And if you've worked with Lottery West before, we don't usually do it that way. It's usually an open grant round. We work with each of the organisations in a very responsive way. In this environment, and given the amount of money that we had available, that wasn't possible. So this is a competitive grant round, and it is a different way of working for us. And then in the future, as the Premier has announced, all profits up to 100 million, we're looking into help with recovery, and we are now working on that, and I'll detail a little bit more work about that as I proceed. So I'll go into the first one, crisis and emergency relief, which hopefully many of you will have applied for. But I will point out again, just in summary, what's happened already is the amendments have been made in the Act to allow us to move really swiftly. The criteria and guidelines are developed for a competitive grant round. We are very much understanding there are many other grants programs out there, and there's a huge amount of work that the team's doing on due diligence to ensure we don't have any exposures around people double dipping. There's a lot of trust here in responding quickly. We have to make sure that that this isn't going to be a scandal in 12 months' time, that we actually are meeting community need. We also had the challenge of looking at the grants which were already in our system. We had over 90 grant applications being discussed at the time when COVID-19 hit. Now, this is really very disappointing for the very many organisations who are in those discussions. We've now contacted each of those organisations, and we are working through how we're dealing with it. The board has withdrawn them from our system, and we've asked grant recipients to come back in around September and recommence the discussions. It may well fit that some of those applications will fit into the recovery, whatever the recovery looks like, but that is very disappointing. So if people will bear with us over that disappointment as we build the approach into the future. So the three funds, crisis and emergency relief is one which I've mentioned, which is the program that has already had a very large demand on it, and we are seeing this is the focus to date. We're focusing on people experiencing hardship and that are at risk of becoming entrenched in disadvantage due to the crisis. People who are newly experiencing hardship and those who are most at risk of serious infection. So this is for crisis relief services and also emergency food relief, working differently in this climate and supporting collaboration to address the increased demand. And this is quite a complex area to get information and the facts to support these programs in this climate, and this is why I'm really interested to what Paul Isison's work as well. So we're having to actually move very quickly. We need to work in partnership with organisations to be very clear where they're getting their evidence of need, because we really want to make the best impact we can. The other programs, I'll just go through quickly with them. All the detail is on our website. This is for the financial hardship as a result of COVID-19 and the cancelled events. We have a definition of the period of COVID-19 impact, which is there for you. You can be looking at anticipated and or actual revenue that has been lost. We are working with organisations. You have to demonstrate this, as you can understand. It also has to be linked back to ensure that it provides value to the community. This is about making sure that organisations can continue to work and support the community. Now, this program is delivered in partnership, as I've mentioned, with the Department of Local Government. I would also acknowledge Venues West, which has been extraordinarily generous, the CEO there, in assisting us with understanding the sports environment and has helped us reach these programs so that's David Etherton, who's been extraordinary. We've thanked them very much for their work. And then the third program, the $25 million program, again, it closes tomorrow. So if you haven't put your application in, please do have a look at it. It's, again, looking at the not-for-profit arts, sports and community organisations. And this is just some examples, and Lorna might be able to respond as well to some of this. This is an organisation, a fund that allows you to look at different ways of delivery. For example, if you can't deliver your service because of COVID-19 situation, there's an opportunity to talk to us about that, to collaborate with others, look at new ways of working, maintain your viability and build resilience is really important for organisations. Again, it's only for the COVID-19 period. This is something I suppose I couldn't emphasise enough, because we are seeing some applications in the system which are a bit much of the same, and it's hard for them to demonstrate that this is specifically around COVID-19. Our governance does absolutely clearly say it has to be COVID-19 focused. So progress to date, and this was as of yesterday morning, and it's changing every moment. So we've had 650 queries, 111 applications to the crisis and emergency relief, around $22.6 million in applications so far. And please, front of mind that we've got 20 million in this fund. We are seeing, though, that there are some, with the other programs coming in, we are seeing that some of these amounts that people are asking for does come down in amount, so we're hoping that this will be enough in the short term. So we've approved, the board has approved, and the Premier $1 million in March and April, and as I just mentioned to Michelle, we've just signed off for $2.4 million to go to the board in a couple of days. And we've now moved to fortnightly board approvals. So the board meets every fortnight to to push these approvals through. So we are working, I can absolutely assure you, as hard as we can to get this money out to community groups without compromising the proper checks and balances. With the event cancellation, it's 858 inquiries, 84 applications, and around $4.4 million to date of applications. We expect this is people are going to be working through the night tonight, and we'll get quite a few tomorrow, but we'll see. But it's a really big push for us then, once this closes, to do the assessments. And we do have colleagues from arts and sports sitting in those panels to actually assess the applications jointly with Lotterywest staff to ensure that we really do understand the nature of the applications in a very quick time frame. We are working through to get these to our board by the end of the financial year, if not before, if it's at all possible. But again, to be rigorous and to really meet community need, we're being as thorough as we can. And the big one, I suppose, that many people will be asking about is, well, what of the future? What is this 2020-21 COVID-19 grants fund of Lotterywest going to look like? What does it mean for my existing Lotterywest grant that's been pulled as a result of COVID-19? Well, this is something we're working on really intently at the moment. We have been working with NOUS Group, and some of you may have already had a discussion with NOUS. They're doing some stakeholder work with us. We want to make sure that we complement the state government recovery with Lotterywest funds to community groups. And of course, that's a very moving feast at the moment, what that recovery might look like. The focus that we're really keen on ensuring is, firstly, we have to keep our lottery going so we can make the 100 million to get out to community. And that's something that is really important. So far, our sales are going pretty well, which is encouraging. But with what is being projected for the finalisation of the Commonwealth's JobKeeper package, we might find that that is not as robust in September, October as it is at the moment. So keeping the lottery running is very important for us, but also in the future to really understand community need. And we're very focused on being very evidence-based. So we're really working through what we're seeing in the research that's being done at the moment. And our funding focus will be complement the government effort, certainly through Sharon O'Neill's role as the recovery coordinator. Other departments' response, what we're hearing from the community sector, working closely with WACOS and others, but also our funding focus, will be looking at community impact, will be our big focus, as it always has been. Our community focus is our driver at Lotterywest around community wellbeing more generally. So we don't want to throw that out with the baby with the bathwater. Measurement and impact analysis is going to be a continued focus for us, and we'll be continuing to work on our Lotterywest Wellbeing Index too, to make sure that the data is really reflecting where we should be allocating grants. My final comment, and I know there's probably questions about what that might look like, we are going to our board with a framework within the next month for the next year's grant program. But importantly, I want to talk just a moment about governance. When we put up our application through the State Government Expenditure Review Committee in a number of areas, we again, a bit like the parliamentary processes, ERC submissions are probably being done in half an hour compared to what they usually are. They're very quick. But what we had very strongly back from the State Cabinet was the importance of a high level of governance of all grant funding that comes out of Lotterywest. So our governance arrangements that we have in place in the moment, they're all maintained. They have been strengthened in a number of ways. At the high level, we're really fortunate to have Colin Murphy, who is a retired Auditor General, oversee the grants process and the deliberations of our framework, of our guidelines, and assisting our board to ensure that our governance is at the highest level. I think that gives government some some comfort that we won't have problems into the future. But of course, this does represent risk at such an urgent time. Always governance is a problem. But I will assure you that when your application is submitted to Lottery West, it's very earnestly being assessed, because we're really focused on that community need. So I think that's just about it. I'm happy to take questions, and perhaps I could pass over. Did you have anything? Lorna's fine, but yeah.
What we thought we'd do, Susan, is thank you very much for that. We thought there'd be value in Paul and Helen giving a brief overview of the work that's been going on around the social impact data. And as you point out, the relationship between these two areas is going to be increasingly important as part of, for all of us, I think, really, it's understanding what are the impacts of COVID-19, and as we continue to move into this recovery phase, getting better at predicting those as well. And then where do we need to be putting resourcing, investment effort in response to those. So the work that Communities has been doing over the last couple of weeks has been we've been pulling together some of the capabilities we've got across our organisation under the leadership of Paul and Helen to bring together some of the data sources and start the work around analysis. Still early days. This is still a maturing space, but we thought there'd be value in giving an overview of it first. So Paul Isaacson and Helen Nice, both assistant DGs within Department of Communities. Who's going to kick off?
Paul is.
Paul,
in
okay.
Fremantle.
And Paul's sitting in our Fremantle office, which many of you will be aware. We've started the move for Communities moving our head office, and some of our team are already there, and the rest of us will have completed that move over the next couple of months. So Paul's joining us out of our Fremantle office. Good afternoon, Paul. Over to you.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you, and to acknowledge that we're Fremantle office here it's also on Whadjuk Noongar country, and to pay respects to elders, both past and present. I'll just give a kind of bit of background, and then Helen's going to talk through some of the slides. But many of you will know that about 3 weeks ago, Sharon O'Neill was appointed as the State Recovery Controller, noting that the recovery to this particular emergency is very different to anything we've seen before, and so some of the structures that we have in place in a state emergency context are going to need to be adapted. But one of Sharon's very critical messages is about the need to be data driven in terms of the impacts. And so we've already been working on some of the social impacts of the COVID emergency and the response to the emergency. And we pulled together resources both within the State Welfare Incident Control Centre as well as in Helen's division, Policy and Service Design, to start to bring together data and analytics of that data, and with a real focus on those lead indicators in our key areas. What can we see coming? What have we seen in the past month? What did we see immediately after the declaration of the state of emergency on the 15th of March? So this is the presentation you're seeing today is the second iteration of a set of slides on the social impact. We've picked those up and fed them into a whole of government process around impacts, and there are five domains that are being looked at. One is social, economic and infrastructure is second, industry third, health fourth, and a specific regional domain as well. Michelle has been given the job of leading the social domain, and so this work is very much directed to supporting Michelle in that task. So probably with that background, I'll hand back to Helen in East Perth to talk through some of the data and what we're starting to see.
many occasions, we actually look at it now and think we should have been doing this for some time, and why weren't we? In compiling the impact statement, what we've done is we've pulled together the data that we have from our own service delivery functions, as well as some of the organisations that we fund. And we've also reached out to other government departments to get access to the data they collect. So these early iterations are really based on on existing recording, and they're based on data, some of which is real time and some of which we've been collecting over a period of time. As we develop the presentation going forward, we're increasingly wanting to look at ways in which we can start to evidence what we're being told of the impact on the ground, because what we're being told continually by our staff, by the families and communities we work with, and by our partners is about the impact of COVID-19 on their life. And it's really important to us that we start to understand the impact of that, and that we're able to reflect it in the data so that we can use that to evidence recovery going forward. So this is quite a long slide presentation, and I don't intend to talk through all the slides. I'll start with some discussion of the high level impacts that we are seeing and hearing about, and then focus on a number of our core portfolios. I'd like to leave some opportunity for questions if we have time, but otherwise very happy to take questions via email at a later time. So first, to the high level impacts, what we know is that we've had an initial very strong emphasis on the health related impacts of COVID-19, both as they happen and also the anticipated health related impact. And we were certainly conscious of the potential significant health impact on the WA community. The health related impact has clearly led to economic impacts. So some of those that we've identified and heard about already are isolation and restrictions. So restrictions have already been announced that they will be eased, but there will still be an ongoing need for social distancing, restricted business and services models, and those restrictions will undoubtedly have an impact on the economic and social wellbeing of the WA community. And they particularly affect vulnerable cohorts, especially in regional and remote areas, because of the restrictions or curtailment they have placed on those vulnerable cohorts in terms of accessing supports. So just one example has been at the height of the restrictions, many of the services for people, homeless people and people who are living on the streets had to be curtailed, or service delivery models had to be altered in a way that meant that people couldn't access services in the way that they traditionally had. Some of the socio-economic impacts, they will be acute for the next 12 months, but they are likely to continue for several years. And some of them are likely to be lifelong impacts. If I think about, for example, the experience of women and access to superannuation, we already know from documents like the Women's Report Card that women tend to have less superannuation, start later, contribute less, and sometimes cease working earlier. We're already hearing that in terms of people being impacted by loss of employment, women have been disproportionately represented, both because some of the industries that they work in have been impacted more quickly, and also because women have had to take on caring roles. So as a lifelong impact, we're already starting to map that the access for women to have income support in their older age will be impacted by this period of time. The health impact for people in Western Australia, the immediate health impacts, we think we have a good handle on those, and there's been a lot of modelling around that. However, the secondary health impacts for the community in relation to mental health concerns, under-treatment of chronic conditions, the impact of the necessary delayed and elective surgery, the increased demand on health services due to homelessness, family domestic violence, they are less well understood, and we are starting to model and try and understand the impact of those now. So just to summarise, we are already seeing areas of concern across the state, both in the data, but also in anecdotal and what we're hearing from our partners and the people we support, that there are increased areas of concern in relation to family and domestic violence. For example, one of the services that we've funded through grants is an organisation called Financial Toolbox that provides financial support and information to women who are considering starting to plan to leave a violent relationship. And I say women because it is predominantly women who are affected by family and domestic violence. in the period of March, they had a phenomenal increase. I think it was almost 300% in the number of people who were actually accessing their website and seeking information. We don't know the numbers of people that led to them to take action, but it was an extraordinary increase in interest in that website and women appearing to seek information. Homelessness, I've already spoken about. We know that there's been an increased concerns about child protection. The rental housing supply is a significant issue for people in Western Australia, and the impact of COVID-19 on young people in relation to employment, disrupted education, opportunities to access service is a concern for that cohort. We know that there's likely to be increased demand on a range of services, pressure on accommodation, including homelessness and social housing. We know there'll be greater impact on agencies providing supports to those vulnerable people, both in terms of government agencies, but clearly also our partner agencies and volunteer groups. The difficult economic and housing market conditions that exist in WA will actually impact the state revenue sources that have been available. So many of you might know that historically Western Australia had housed our social housing system through the actual development arm of the Department of Communities, and that we sourced revenue from the development of housing sites, both social and also properties that we sold, and that they funded the social housing system. The depressed housing market conditions for some time have been affecting our ability to operate in this space, and that will only become increasingly more acute. Many of the social impacts that we've talked about and I've noted are likely to continue for some time. Some of those impacts may be permanent. For example, if increased children come into care as a result of some of the impacts of COVID-19, the impact of the trauma of that will last a lifetime. Thank you. I'm just going to talk to some of the key slides now. I won't read all the points, but I'll point to just the graphs underneath and what they tell us. So we know in relation to family and domestic violence that social isolation and lockdown increases the risk for family and domestic violence. The fact that women and children are less seen during the isolation period, that women haven't had access to their workplace, to their friends and to their community in the way that they might previously have done, have clearly reduced some of the protective options and protective networks for people experiencing domestic violence. That's led to some interesting conversations at a national level about how we get out information in relation to family and domestic violence supports. And so you will notice that there's a Commonwealth funded campaign which is going to be rolled out across the country. And in the conversations about where we advertised family and domestic violence supports, one of the changes was that we identified that actually in the time of isolation, supermarkets were one of the few places where women were still going to be seen. And so the Department of Social Security had been working with supermarkets about how they could place advertisements that women could see and that would be readily accessible. We know that calls to the Women's Domestic Violence Helpline increased in March, but then they fell in April. That might reflect difficulties in women being able to access a service if you're actually in your home and the perpetrator is in the home for longer periods of time because they've lost their job, because they're self-isolating. Clearly, the ability to access helplines became constrained. We have noticed a slight increase in public housing applications seeking priority assistance due to family and domestic violence. We would predict that that might increase because there's typically a lag between incidents and people seeking support. Homelessness. We know that COVID-19 impacts disproportionately people experiencing homelessness, both in terms of because of the increased, they are more likely to be vulnerable to poor health outcomes. They are more likely to be living with pre-existing health conditions that would increase the risk that they would be adversely affected by COVID-19 in the event of a community outbreak. And we are extremely grateful that we haven't had a community outbreak. Entry Point Perth is a free assessment and referral service that assists people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Calls to that service increased considerably across February and March, but they fell in April. Again, much of this data over time, we need to interrogate the significance of dips and falls. So a dip in April at this point, we'll just follow that and see what that might mean. There has been, for example, increase in bed vacancies in youth crisis accommodation, but overall we have low numbers of youth crisis accommodation. So a decrease in demand, we would need to understand that over time.
Helen, probably 2 minutes.
Right, child protection demand will be the last one I speak to then. We've got overall, currently we have 5,523 children in care. Many of those children are cared for by family members. And one of the interesting things is that many of those are grandparents. We knew that. I think we probably have a great idea about the proportion of that. So grandparents are in themselves more vulnerable. They are also caring for our most vulnerable children. Carer families, some of them reported limited access to IT equipment, and that affected their ability to support children in schooling arrangements. And there's been additional financial pressures for carers, particularly kinship carers who may have lost employment. We anticipate that there will be potential impact from mental health and behavioural problems for children in care when they were not being at school, and the loss of those networks and social connections. The central intake team that takes child protection concerns across the metropolitan area, calls did increase in February and March, again then fell back in April. We would say that's too early to predict that that's been a decline. We'll follow that indicator over time. So I might stop there. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. That's terrific. I expect this is going to be an area, and I invite, in fact, an area that the whole of both government agencies working in this space, not-for-profit sector, community groups and the like will want to continue to both participate in and contribute to the data we're looking to collect around the COVID-19 recovery. Thanks, Paul and Helen. Now we're going to go to some questions in the few minutes that we've got left, and Helen Reid's going to pull some out from what's been coming through.
Yeah, so perhaps the first question is to Susan. Does being successful in obtaining JobKeeper exclude organisations from applying for grants?
So I can answer that. No, part of the application is that we ask for you to note where you have been successful in obtaining other stimulus packages, and it might be that you needed 100% and you only got 40%, so we would then look at the 60% to keep you afloat. So no, and we would expect that you have sought that out. Yeah.
Okay, a couple more. Is there going to be a second round for cancelled events that take into consideration the events that were occurring later in the year, such as October, November, December, as it seems large gatherings will not be permitted then either, and these are massive income generators for many organisations?
I think that one is something that will be in our framework for the future, because certainly that's what we're hearing as well, is that there may well be a continuation of restrictions. But it'll also be an opportunity, I think, for organisations to look at different ways to fundraise, I hope. So we're urging groups to talk to us and see how we can assist them to perhaps give some thoughts to those other areas. But it may not look in the same form as the existing program. We're learning a lot from the program. We will learn and reform and make it hopefully better for community. But our focus is to support community organisations. So,
yeah.
Then a related question, the final one, Susan, on your presentation is: will the support for resilient organisations be able to support expenditure that has already occurred? So the comment was made, many organisations had to invest heavily in technology to assist in the delivery of services or to provide vulnerable kids equal access to education and trauma supports.
So part of the assessment will consider the retrospective costs that people have incurred. And it might be, if we can't entirely do that, we might look more flexibly at what else is needed to help them recover and be more resilient. So,
Thank you. A couple then on the back of the social impact assessment.
Good.
Who are you engaging with to get the data? Is it just internal government data?
No, it's not. We obviously have used our own data, as you would expect.
Look, I'll just make the comment that, we don't have all the data, and I guess especially in the community services space in terms of mental health, alcohol and drug, We were just talking this morning with our task force. We really need to work closer with providers to actually get the data that we currently have, and also identify what data we don't have and start to collect that, because it will be really important in providing that evidence going forward. So it's just a general comment. I'm sure it's probably consistent across most services.
And the general point, I think, of this being a really important topic for the task forces going forward, I think is what we see, that shaping the data collection, the analysis strategies for filling the gaps in data will be a key topic for discussion around the task force tables.
What do you see the role of local government in data collection to formulate social impact assessments at the local level?
Well, I think we need to be getting the data from wherever we can get the data from, to be honest. So yeah, absolutely. So, but that includes Commonwealth services as well as what's happening locally. So yeah, so I think we need to think big about data to have that, you know, a bit of a roadmap of where we're going to go with data and understand, but very much in a planned way, because we're not going to be able to achieve all of that in the long term quickly, but let's have a plan to go forward with that.
As a principle, I think we will see in the framework, the recovery framework coming out from government, taking a regional place-based approach to all of the planning and the decision-making in recovery is going to be a priority for government. That the worst thing we could be doing is taking just generic whole of state data, making decisions in Perth. We know that does not work. So that really starts to speak to the really critical role that local government's joining up at a regional level around data, emerging issues, and then actions is going to be quite just fundamental to the recovery program. So, Susan?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to mention in Michelle's role as the coordinator for State Welfare Coordinator.
State Welfare Coordinator.
I know
yes.
that in that forum already, the Department of Welga circulated some great material which we are using in our in looking at the applications that we're receiving.
Yeah.
So it's already starting to flow, and I think that we just have to continue to do that. And I know also through the Department of Premier and Cabinet and their role with remote Aboriginal communities, we're also getting some great data from them. So I think it's we just have to keep exchanging information, keep it going and flowing, because it really will inform good decision making.
There's some thanks for a great session here. They're also commenting that given the deadline for Lottery West funding, is it possible for a copy of the video and slides from today's session to be on our website today?
Sure.
So we've got our technical people saying they'll do their best, and so we will endeavour it. We will be getting it up as fast as we can.
But our website,
right?
Our website's got absolutely everything on it.
Lottery West will answer your every question on your website.
Yep.
But this will be available maybe this afternoon, but definitely tomorrow morning. Yes. Looking at our technical people, I don't want to commit to something that's going to stretch them. I think we're done now. We certainly, as I said, do invite feedback from you on the series overall, today's session. If there are any questions that have come through, we do commit to ensuring they are answered on our website or the Lottery West website, if that's the problem, if the information is not already there. So we follow up on all of your questions as well. And so I really do just want to conclude with a big thanks to the technical team that helped bring this together. We've never done these before, so we've stepped into new territory here, but we will be continuing to use it because it's an important way of engaging with all of you. I want to thank Deb and Jen, who have partnered not only through this series, but really in the emergency response to COVID. And we could not have come as far as we have without working in partnership in the way we did. Again, in ways we've never worked before. And I want to thank all of you. There's been big thanks going around over the last few days from the Premier and and ministers. I think we cannot overstate what has been achieved up to this point for our state. And I know earlier times I've reflected on, I think I wouldn't want to be living anywhere else in this moment. And I think we probably all continue to have those thoughts over the weekend. And it's just a testament to every single person around our state and the way in which everyone has responded to this emergency. And I know from me and from all of us in the room here, our determination is to continue those new ways of working in partnership and with purpose, I think would be the way that I would sum it up. And so I thank you for joining us in these Tuesdays at 12 sessions, and I wish you well and stay safe. Thank you, everyone.